All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to an open learning talk from MIT's Open Learning. My name is Chris Capizzola. I'm the Senior Associate Dean for Open Learning here at MIT. I'm really excited to be welcoming you here today, and we've just learned in the last few minutes that people are joining us from literally all around the world, all different time zones, all different weather. So I'll just say it's a sort of a sunny, wintry afternoon here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and we're really excited to be sharing some research with you. We're going to be hearing from two staff leaders here at MIT's Open Learning, Megan Perdue and Shira Frechtman, and they're going to be talking to us today about sort of focusing on learners in learning design, right? Really kind of taking a moment to focus on the learners themselves, getting to know them, who they are, and also using the best research techniques that we have to really understand those people, to understand their motivations, their learning journeys, and how we can let that knowledge shape the learning design that we do in our own courses, in our own ways. So I'm going to just sort of say a couple things here at the top of the hour, and then I'll turn it over to our two presenters. First of all, as you may know, if you've attended one of our talks in the past, the talk is being recorded. The video will be posted on the Open Learning YouTube channel, basically as soon as possible, as soon as it's fully captioned and appropriate, ready for use. Second, there will be time in this hour for questions and answers. So please feel free to put those into the chat really at any time. And we'll sort of curate them, we'll collect them, and we'll share them with Megan and Shira. We may not get to every single question, but certainly feel free to put them in whenever you are inspired to do so. But let's dive in. First, what I'd like to do is ask each of our two panelists to introduce themselves, briefly a little bit about what you do here at MIT, what brought you to this webinar, and then we'll dive in first for Megan. But Megan and Shira, first, introduce yourselves.
Hi, everybody. It's so great to have you guys here. I'm Megan Perdue. I am the digital learning scientist for the School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences, quite a long title. And in that role, I kind of have, I would say, like a couple of different hats that I wear. One is that I work to produce and run a number of the open online courses that have come out of the School of Humanities, and I have those on MITx and on edX as well. And I also help faculty in the school do kind of experiments and new things they want to try in their on-campus teaching with digital learning or blended learning. If they need support and kind of trying something new, I help them out with that. And then I also do research into online pedagogy and sort of how people are learning in MOOCs. So.
All right, Shira.
Hello. I also have a long title and wear lots of hats. I'm Shira Frechtman. I'm the Assistant Manager of Educational Technology and Lead Learning Designer at MITx. I'm part of the MITx team. There are about 20 of us who support MIT faculty and course teams in various ways as they develop and run their MOOCs. Specifically, my job is to consult with MIT faculty and help them transition from their on-campus course into a MOOC environment by leading what we call a strategy meeting or a course design meeting. And in that meeting, we discuss some of the differences between the on-campus audience and of that, which is in the MOOC, and how that can affect course design. So very relevant for today's talk. We also go over some of the instructional strategies based in the learning sciences that lead to effective learning. So that's sort of my learning design hat. For my educational technology hat, I support course teams on the platform, whichever one they choose to run their MOOC on, so edX or MITx Online, and provide them with trainings, answer questions, fix issues, report more serious ones, test new features, blah, 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 among other things. And I'm so excited to be here to discuss Megan's research and how it applies to our work.
All right, so I'm going to kick things off first by just posing a couple of questions to introduce Megan's presentation, a very brief presentation of her research on learner-focused course design. And I'm really excited about this as someone who has sort of developed a MOOC online course. I found myself wondering who takes that, right? Who gets excited? What are their motivations? And I know that that's a question that has really sort of preoccupied Megan, and she's really turned that into a research question that I think is really going to make a huge contribution to how we do course design and how we have learner-focused course design. So first, Megan, why don't you just sort of walk us through some of your research and also specifically the MOOC Learning Design Guide that you've been working on.
Great, yeah, thank you. I'm just gonna share my presentation. And I'm so excited to talk to you guys about this work because it's been a couple of years that this research project has been ongoing, and it's a kind of a multi-cycle, multi-stage project. So I'm going to talk to you about at least the first couple of stages of this today. And as Chris said, like a big part of the motivation was sort of thinking about this problem of new faculty and new course designers in particular coming to work on making MOOCs. And there's kind of been a lack of information about who MOOC learners are and why they are taking these courses. And in the space of that lack, we've tended to just assume that MOOC learners are kind of the same as MIT undergraduates, and a lot of things flow out of that assumption. So I wanted to sort of dive into that and think about this more. So I have this little diagram here. It's kind of a flow chart of MOOC making. So on the left, we have a representation of our on-campus teaching. So we know that all of our courses come from actual MIT classes that are taught, live in a classroom with a chalkboard and such. And then we take sort of the best of that teaching that we can, and we translate that into the MOOC platform. And people have gotten really creative about what aspects of that online teaching we can try to replicate online. And we found that some parts of that teaching really are more efficient or sort of easier to do in an online format. So we can take that back into the classroom. And then there's this really nice feedback loop between making improvements in the MOOC that are then going back into the on-campus class and then bringing improvements from the course back into the MOOC. But I think there's not such as a formal structure for this feedback loop on the learner side. So what are the learners bringing to the course and how can we improve the course based on them? And I don't want to suggest that no one is doing this work, because I have a lot of excellent colleagues in the Digital Learning Lab who are very experienced. And, sort of the longer people have been doing this work, they kind of figure out ways to connect this feedback loop in their own courses and to make this iteration work. But even amongst the DLLs, I found that people kind of tend to operate and a little bit on their own, like we're not necessarily sharing best practices between each other. And there might be some gaps in even how people are doing it. So it would be nice to get everyone together and to figure this out. So that's sort of the goal of this. So I wanted to explore this further. So I developed a few research questions, sort of what are really starting at the ground floor. What are learners' motivations for taking MOOCs? What value did they derive from the class? What value are they seeking from the class? And how does this motivation and value impact their behavior in the class and sort of their experiences in the course? So I recruited a sample of 15 learners. It's a qualitative study, so it's a smaller sample than you might be used to. And the 15 learners were sampled from across a range of different courses, and they were sampled based on how much of the course they completed. So I wanted to get people who had maybe just watched one video or done half of the course, or who had completed the course. To sort of understand. But I also, when I was speaking to these people, I talked to them about any course that they had taken. So we kind of opened up the conversation to any course that they had taken, as well as the course they were sampled on. And I analyzed this data, all the transcripts from the hours and hours and hours of interviews. And I sort of boiled it down into these sort of main themes here. And I've arranged this into these kind of three columns. We have the motivations, the values associated with the motivations, and then the behavior that they described. And these are organized into, I would call them sort of domains or orientations. I wouldn't describe them as rules or like as binding necessarily. Some learners may move differently through these paths, but I did find that they kind of grouped together into specific domains. And also these can change. Certainly they can change for learners as they're going through the course. It could be based on outside things changing in their lives, but it also could be based on the course itself, that the course surprised them and changed their perspective of the material and how they were moving through the course. So it's my disclaimer. But to sort of talk to you about these 3 domains. So the first is this connection perspective or orientation. So I would say people who are motivated by connection, this could be a desire to connect to a specific professor, it could be an institution, it could be other learners who are interested in these topics, or it could be even to their own identity as a student. Like I remember I used to love taking courses as a college student, and I want to feel that sense of being a student again. So then the value associated with that is that ability to feel that sense of connection or identity building. And these people tended to describe their behavior in the courses as, I would say, like traditional auditing behavior, and that they would choose some aspect of the course to complete, and then they would just do that. Like maybe they just watched the lecture videos, and they maybe even didn't feel the need to watch them, they just listened to them while they're doing the dishes or something. Or maybe they just did all the PSETs that they had access to. Or they just were in the discussion forums, talking to other people or helping them with the problems that they were working on. So they kind of chose like a particular style of taking the course and sort of stuck with that, but didn't really feel a need to complete the entire course as it was designed. That tended to be the second group, this exploration group. So these were people who described the reasons for taking the course as, they were sort of explorers in the world of knowledge, and they just wanted to build out their understanding of the world and their knowledge of how things work. And it could be that they often described having certain gaps in their education from as a young person that they wanted to go back and fill in, or maybe they just love learning and they just wanted to understand more about the world. So then, of course, the value is that they are able to have this sense of understanding. I remember one person told me, like, I saw the news and they were talking about the Supreme Court, and then I had just taken this MOOC on Supreme Courts and government, and I could really understand everything that was going on, and I felt like this surreal sense of understanding and accomplishment. So it's like this feeling like you know how things work. And these people described completing the entire course as it was designed. So it's sort of like they're on a journey and this is the map and they're going to follow it. But interestingly, they didn't necessarily earn the certificates. Sometimes they did and sometimes they didn't. It depended on just whether they thought it was like, it was a sense of value to them personally, like, oh, I like this sense of achievement. But if they didn't feel that, then they didn't pay. They would just take the entire course as much as they could without earning the certificate. The third group was this knowledge and skill acquisition group. So these were people who were in the course because they were seeking knowledge or to learn a skill to apply to a specific goal. So this goal could be that they were working on some new project at work and they needed to learn how to do something. It could be that they were trying to apply to a new job, or they were interested in applying to a degree program. It could be small, it could be large, but sort of seeking that knowledge for that purpose of application. So then the value is that they are able to actually achieve that application. And then their behavior ranged very widely, but it was really as they completed as much of the course as they needed to accomplish their goal. So perhaps if they only needed to watch 30 seconds of one video to understand how to perform some kind of function, they could have accomplished their goal with just that. Or they might need to earn an entire MicroMasters credential to get into the degree program or to be eligible for the job they're looking for. So this was sort of my big theory based on my qualitative work, which I'm happy to show you the paper draft I'm working on, but it is like 45 pages long. So it's a little dense academic work to be particularly enticing to new faculty and course designers who are making MOOCs for the first time. So I wanted to assemble a group of expert practitioners to help me to sort of translate and interpret these research findings in a way that would be useful, a useful tool for people who are coming to this work. So I put together 2 working groups. One was made up of Digital Learning Lab members. A number of them I've seen here today. So hi guys, thanks for all your hard work. And also there was a working group from the Online Worldwide Learner Services team, a new acronym. I'm learning it at Open Learning. And Shira was technically on that team, but I also worked with her independently, the most like dedicated from as an individual from many of the teams. So she gets her own box. So the first thing I did with these working groups was I presented my research findings to them and just firstly made sure that they felt that these results were true to their experiences. We sort of verified that they had seen the same things in the learners that they'd seen. And then we sort of brainstormed what from this results are useful, is useful information for new course designers and new faculty to know. And also what, not only from my research, but what from our experience doing this work, like would we like people to know? Or like how could we package this information in a way that we think would be useful for them? So we went through several rounds of brainstorming and creating drafts of the document. So I'm just going to kind of show you it very quickly before we move on. So this is it. I don't know if you've seen it before. It's just 2 pages. We wanted it to be very short and sweet so people could look at it without getting too overwhelmed. It has these learner archetypes. Actually, both working groups independently came up with the idea of learner archetypes, which I thought was interesting. I think it's just, it's useful to have kind of a face, cartoon face, and a name and a location and kind of a story behind these different archetypes. And these are really, we wanted to represent the kind of range of learners who are taking this course and to give sort of examples of these different people. So these aren't necessarily based on real people. They're kind of loosely based on some of the research participants I worked with, and also components tied in from our own experience. And then we also wanted to put together these 10 sort of tips and tricks, which speak to this sort of the different orientations of learners and the value that they expect to see. So how can we create value for this wide diversity of learners and in a way that is doable for a course team that is small and working with minimal resources. And we also wanted to give some advice about how to incorporate learning science principles, and also just some advice from things that we have picked up along the way as practitioners. And I can say briefly, the work I'm doing, sort of wrapping up now, is I've been working on evaluating this guide, which I've done through doing some pre and post surveys and interviews with MIT faculty and course designers working around open learning of various levels of experience, just to see, to ensure that like the guide is doing what we wanted it to do. It's communicating the information we hoped it would, and also to think about what does this mean for how we think about courses and how we evaluate our work going forward. So I'm happy to talk about this more, but I'll stop preaching at you now.
All right, well, thanks. It's you've clearly, you've gotten people excited, and there's a lot to talk about here. But before we dive further into it, I want to just turn things over to Shira, because she plays a crucial role in kind of thinking this process through, and in particular the way we get from sort of research about MOOC learners to how this changes learning design as a practice. So Shira, I'd like to hear your perspective as a learning designer. Sort of what are the takeaways from this research, and what are ways that we could, what are best ways to kind of move from this research into learning design as a practice?
Yeah, thank you. So I guess I would say one of the biggest takeaways we need to be thinking more broadly about how to evaluate the success of MOOCs, right? I mean, typically we think about course completion and certificates earned. And from Megan's research, we just saw that not everybody is doing that. So I think that a lot of people who are evaluating MOOCs look at course completion and certificates earned because it mimics what happens in the classroom, right? When students are on campus, they enroll in a course, they intend to be in it from start to finish. They don't pick and choose which lectures they're going to do, which problems they're going to attempt, which projects they're going to do. Well, maybe some of them do, but for the most part, we hope that students are in there from start to finish. And that they're in there to learn, build on their learning, ultimately complete the course and with a passing grade. Those two pieces, completion and certificates earned, are essentially the same as what's happening on campus as what's happening in the MOOC. But those aren't the only learners that are in there, right? As Megan's research suggests, there are a lot of learner motivations for people who enroll in the MOOCs. And I think we need to be thinking more about who these learners are and how to design for all of them, right? They could be looking to acquire a new skill in a profession. Maybe be sampling courses to get new ideas for themselves. They may be a teacher going into a particular section to refresh themselves on a particular concept so that they can then teach their own students. And completion for these particular cases would not be a good indicator of whether the course was successful or not, but maybe perhaps looking at the engagement metrics, right? Videos watched, articles read, problems attempted, discussion posts written or responded to, and so on. So from a learning design perspective, we really need to be thinking about designing courses for the success of all of these learners. So I think partly we can start by making sure that courses are structured in well-organized modules that scaffold learning. So it allows learners who are only interacting with one or two sections to still engage in a learning path within those modules. And we need to make sure that we're using instructional strategies such as active learning, spaced retrieval, worked examples, use of authentic real-world problems and examples, and actionable feedback so that the learners will remain engaged, on track, and continuing to build on their learning, whether they're just doing that in one module or throughout the entire course. And then of course, the forum, right? We need to have learners engage with one another. So Megan highlights one of the learners who is in there to connect, like all they want to do is connect with others in their field or just feel part of a community. So make sure that we provide opportunities for learners to connect with others so that they can feel part of a community, provide opportunities to reflect on their own learning, and also be able to learn from each other and each other's experiences.
So say a little bit more about some specific examples, either Megan or Shira, but ways in which, this in the research, it changed like a specific thing that you did in a class, because I think that some people would, just would love to hear from that concrete example.
I guess I can take a stab at this, and I can say that this is pretty new. So we just published this design guide, like I think last month or the month before. So this was really work that we've just been working on this fall and late summer. So I'm not sure how much of it has cycled into actual use yet, but I can say it's definitely changed. I mean, even the way that I'm thinking about designing my courses or redesigning courses that are coming out next, and thinking about how things are organized and making sure that things are easily findable from the beginning. So for instance, if someone's coming in really just looking for one topic or one video, like can they see that easily from when they enter the course? Like, did they have to really go through every single page to find out what's there, or is there like a kind of easily accessible overview of the materials? I have been, as I said, talking with faculty and course designers, kind of evaluating this guide and getting their sense of it. And one thing someone mentioned was, oh wow, like I didn't realize, I never thought about other faculty using this course for teaching materials. And I realized like I don't have a list of all of my readings anywhere in the course, like that would be easily accessible for a faculty member just coming in and saying like I want to peek beneath the hood and see how this faculty member teaches this course. Like, what's their syllabus? What are the readings they're assigning? And he was like, oh, that would be such an easy thing to just add quickly, but that would make it so much easier for a faculty member to come in and like actually use this video or to see what readings we're using. Sure, I don't know if you could think of any.
Well, I think going back to sort of the forum, right, making sure that you always have a space for learners to engage and maybe provide prompts, right? So it's not just an open forum for people to just sort of talk about whatever, but actually prompt them to speak about their experiences, learning from others, and actually something that we talked about, and that was put into the guide. It's possible that the faculty member can actually use some of the examples that they learn about in the course from these learners. So that would be super helpful to bring in more of a global perspective.
Yeah, I think that sounds really promising, because one of the things that's so fun about sort of residential in-person instruction is sort of letting the students change the course as the semester goes along, right? And I think that part of what you're suggesting here is that there are ways that you can design the course so that that kind of feedback can reach into the course and change it as it's going along, not only to give students a voice, right, or learners a voice in the course, but also just to give them belonging and better learning outcomes. Yeah. So Megan, maybe can you walk us through maybe one or two of the design tips and tricks? Because I feel like, those of us, and the link is in the chat, and if you're, able to kind of read along as you go, but obviously we can't cover all 10, but I think people would love it if you just sort of walk through maybe one or two and how they emerged from the actual research process.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And I would say, off the top of my head, the one I would love to explain is actually the first one, asking people to bring their own personality and interests and sort of spirit into the course and making the course. And I would say I thought this was a good one to lead with, because a lot of the faculty I've worked with often feel like, oh, like we're making these very serious educational videos and like I have to, like be very serious and I'm going to read this script and it's like not going to have any humor, or like if the humor is, it's going to be very calculated. Because they're like very aware that like lots of people are going to be watching this and these videos are going to exist. But I have found, and actually what I was actually, one of the things I was most surprised about that the interview participants talked to me about, and a lot of the people I talked to said something about this, was that some of the faculty in the courses they were taking, they felt like some kind of connection to, like, oh, I feel like I know this person. I think it's called like a parasocial relationship. So it's kind of like, oh yes, like this, like, oh, he's so funny, or like I'm so interested in his research. And the faculty who were able to kind of bring their personality in were not only able to like inspire learners to learn more, but also to sort of take more of the course just because they were so excited to hear what this person had to say. But also to investigate what other research they had done and kind of dive more deeply into this world of academia that this particular faculty member inhabited. And I don't think many of the faculty who were making courses like really perceived of this possibility of kind of like, it's not necessarily like a fan community, but a community of interested learners around the world who like they have some kind of bond to. And like the more you can bring your own personality and interests and kind of inspire the learners with like your true nerdiness, I think, the more there's like potential for that. So that's one. Shira, I feel like you created a few of these if you want to talk about one.
Sorry, I was having trouble finding the unmute button. Well, I did sort of talk about engage your learners in course creation. That's number 4. Let's see, what else can we discuss? So number 2, I can go there. Keep your videos short. So make sure you're chunking the information, right? And intersperse them with opportunities to actively engage. So we want to make sure that learners are retrieving the information and retaining that information and not just passively watching videos. As they're going through the problems, case studies, exercises, and discussion forums. And something that we also wrote about was they appreciate some variety in activities. So don't just make everything multiple choice, right? We don't have to just have a video and then a multiple choice question, but actually think about what problem type actually works best for what you're asking, and actually make sure you're also quizzing them on or having them retrieve not just factual information, but how to apply the information as well.
I would think, and this, Shira, I wonder your thoughts on this, that shorter videos can also help with the fact that many students, many learners may be joining the course not at the very beginning, right? They might want to actually just jump in the middle, be there for part of the content, looking for something very specific. I'm thinking of some of the very, kind of targeted learners that Megan has identified, application-oriented, sort of learners who just want one skill, right? Or just want to have one thing explained to them. So what else do we need to do besides just making the videos shorter, right? Presumably we need to kind of frame them and explain them a little differently too.
Definitely. That is something that I usually talk about with faculty, is making sure that you frame, what you're going to be talking about. Because if a learner does come in and they haven't been in previous parts of the course, maybe, it would be sort of starting from the middle.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking about what you're going to be discussing and why. And the other thing is that a lot of people are doing this part-time in MOOCs, right? And so making sure that people actually have the time to go through this in the amount of time that they have.
So I think, let me just turn another question to Megan, which is to sort of think about, and this is a question I didn't warn you about ahead of time, but but I'll ask you to reflect on it a little bit. How this kind of research and learner-focused course design can address, say, questions of equity in the broadest sense, right? People coming from different parts of the world, different language backgrounds, different prior preparation, different learning perspectives. Is there anything in this for people who are designing around equity and inclusion?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's something I've thought about a lot. And I think like a commitment to the awareness that you're designing for a very diverse population, like, helps to at least begin to approach this equitable design with like the right spirit or attitude. Certainly, we think a lot about ability, differences in ability when we're designing MOOCs. A lot because we legally have to, but also because there's just really are like a lot of people with different ableness coming into the courses, and we have to think about, okay, if I'm designing this exercise, how is this going to be for these different kinds of people? Like, are they going to be able to actually do this or not? But I think also, and this is something that I feel strongly about, if you've ever worked with me on a MOOC, being aware that we're not designing for an American population, because most of the learners are from all over the world. I didn't sample on geography in my qualitative research, and I only had one learner who was from the United States. Everyone else was from, and there were no duplicates in countries, so they were from all over the world, and I think that is representative of the MOOC learners. So you have to really think about, when you're using language or referencing examples or things that are common knowledge in the United States, like, are people going to understand that in other countries. And it can be really insidious because I think we, especially we're mostly Americans working in this space at MIT. So you kind of like, you take for granted a lot of things. I remember once, I think there was like a reference on an open learning website to peanut butter and jelly. Like, oh, it's like as it goes to like peanut butter and jelly. And I was like, wait, that's a very American kind of sandwich. Like people in the rest of the world are not necessarily eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Maybe they've heard of them, but they might not know like the cultural implications of that phrase. But so like it's stuff like that you really wouldn't think of. Like you just kind of, they're common things that are said, or common examples that are used, or words that are used in problems or in lectures that you really have to think, like you have to really go back to this question of, will my learners understand this? Where are they coming from? Like, okay, like how do we design for this incredibly diverse audience? And I think the answer is also that you really necessarily can't, and that you have to learn over time. You have to let the learners be able to tell you where the problems are and to participate in creating the course and participate in this iteration. Because you're not going to catch everything the first time. So it has to be this living, breathing kind of experience that can build on, previous flaws or failings or missteps, and take advantage of opportunities from things we're learning from the learners.
I just wanted to add one thing to that, which was that's also true of, the problem types. So we have something that's like peer assessment or open response assessment, and providing feedback. And so I always talk about how we really need to teach the learners how to do the problem, right? Before actually giving them an actual problem that's worth points, or worth a lot of points, just so that everybody is on the same page and knows how to do the actual problem, and understands the reason for, again, providing feedback to one another, just so that, there may be some cultural differences or prior knowledge differences, and providing this to everybody is super helpful.
Yeah, I mean, those were very useful for me. Before I had this, design guide in hand. But when I was putting together with some colleagues a massive open online course that dealt with the history of the United States and the Philippines, and we knew that there would be sort of a global audience for this, but that sort of American and Filipino sort of learners would be approaching this with lots of different sort of prior knowledge about about terminology, about sort of the places we were referencing, the images we were using, and also different levels of investment, right? Sort of cultural investment in the content, right? That might be much approached very differently from different kinds of groups, and I think that's really has been sort of important. And for me, where we saw this in our course team was in the discussion forums, right? And sort of being kind of open to encouraging people in the discussion forum to to kind of talk about themselves, their motivations for learning, and they were very diverse, right? This was a course that deals very much with visual images and the history of photography and design, as well as sort of U.S. foreign relations, and that draws students from all kinds of different sort of motivations. Some of whom are really kind of interested in kind of the professional skills that come with design history, with critical visual studies. Some of whom were really kind of learning about a part of the world that they didn't know. Some of whom were really kind of engaging with a part of the world they knew extremely well, right, and wanted to kind of find meaning and kind of and history, and kind of connect family history and identity to kind of the kind of scholarship that we would do in this case in a humanities course at MIT. So let's maybe spend one more question, then open it up to. There's a lot of awesome Q&A coming in the chat, and so that's great. But I guess I want to come back to this question of assessment, right, and metrics for success, right? So Shira, so you kind of took up this in after Megan's presentation, the question of what counts as a metric of success, enrollment numbers, completion rates, et cetera. And here I'm thinking, both about, how learners define success, but then also how course designers and at that next level, the institutions, whether it's MIT or whoever, the institutions that sort of support and fund and make these things possible, what are coming out of this? What are some metrics that we should be looking at besides just the magic numbers of enrollments and course completion? So let's start with Shira and then turn that after that to Megan on this question.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complex question, right? It's not so easy. And I do think there are learners who are taking this for multiple reasons. So it's really hard to know how to measure their success if they're only going in to do, to connect, for instance. So sometimes we can look at engagement metrics, right? So how much have they, if we knew that we know that you're going in to look at this particular skill and you're going to watch these videos, then we can look at that, but we won't know that after the fact. So it's really a complex and complicated question. The other thing is there are other measures of success, right? Like we bring, as Megan mentioned, we bring our MOOC content back into our residential courses. That is a success of the MOOC. We do research with this data, lots and lots of data to look at what learners are doing. So, I mean, there are other ways of measuring success. For this particular question of like, how do we measure learners' success? It's really, really hard.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say this is a question I'm super excited about right now, because this is really the last phase of, or the next phase of this work that I'm doing is really looking at this question of how do we measure success, and working with the faculty and course designers I've been working with in this last round of research. I've been trying to analyze that, looking for these kind of success matrix that we could come up with. And I'm actually working right now, it's very much work in progress, on I would say like a matrix of success. I think we could have like a lot of different measurements, and some of which would be easily quantified and some of which would be more difficult to quantify, but we could still look at it anyway. But we could have this sort of complex matrix of success, and with all these different points, which we could operationalize. And then I think a lot of it depends on the goals of the course designer and the course team going into it. Because some of these goals, or some of the success matrices are going to depend on some pretty important decisions and goals that the team had going into it. Because some teams really do prioritize completion. And for them, like, completion is the primary goal of this course. And they could design the course in such a way that that is clear to the learners, and that is, what they're aiming for. So that would be a primary metric that they're going to use to determine success, alongside a number of other metrics as well. But perhaps other course teams, like, that's less important to them, as it is that this course is going to be used as a resource. So maybe they're going to make different design choices that are going to take them in a different direction. But I think a lot of this, what I hope to produce next, would be this kind of success matrix and some ways to operationalize the metrics on the matrix, but also to help course teams to be really clear about what they want going into it. And maybe these goals could change. They could change as they run the course, and they could change from course run to course run. But just to think about this and have the tools to think about this in a more sophisticated way. And also so we can communicate that to the learners, and say, this is what we're trying to do, help us understand if we're reaching that goal. Like, that will also help us collect that data to understand how well we're doing.
Yeah, I think, well, I was going to ask you what's next for your research, and now we know, and this will be, I think there are people, and even in the chat, people have said they, they're looking forward to reading that. And that, I guess there will be another open learning talk on that topic down the road. one thing that strikes me from what you've just said is the importance of really, being reflective from the very beginning, right? Spending the time, as an individual instructor, as a course team, really kind of articulating the goals and thinking about that. This is a basic principles of learning design, but it just needs to be mentioned as many times as possible. I'm going to, since we don't have a ton of time, I want to make sure that there's time for questions and answers that are coming from the audience. So I'm going to be, sort of putting a few of them forward, maybe combining a few. I'd like to start with some, that came towards the beginning from Jeff Wilson and Ivana, which is about the MOOC design guide itself, right? There are quotes in here, about motivation. And so, Megan, are these from actual learners, from your actual interviews? And what are some examples of how, we've talked a little bit about this, how the personas are used to shape learning design. But maybe let's start with just that first one. Where do these quotes come from? And maybe this is really about your research process, right? How did you kind of create these archetypes?
Yeah, the quotes are from my research, and they aren't necessarily related to the archetype of the person who said them, but they were maybe someone close by, because sometimes there are multiple people have been combined to create one of the archetypes, or it might be someone we imagined plus someone I spoke to. But the quotes are things that were actually said. I did not make those up. And how we created the archetypes, that really was the result of some brainstorming with the working groups. I didn't actually present the archetypes. I didn't talk to them about my participants at all. We just kind of talked about what are examples that would represent the range of examples of types of learners that we think are different from each other, and that have relevant differences that new course designers and new faculty would need to know. Because I think like Chris was saying at the beginning, often when you're starting off, you're trying to imagine who are these people taking this course, and it all feels very opaque and confusing. And it's like, okay, I know we're going to have some people from around the world, but who are they? Are they 18? Are they, they all that's people just tend to imagine these MIT undergraduates in the absence of other information. So this was just an attempt to kind of put the name and a person behind who these are. So then you could maybe even scan through your course design at the end and say, okay, I have these learner archetypes. Did I provide information for this one? Did I meet the goals of this one? It's just an easy sort of human way to go back and assess your design.
Let me ask a follow-up, because I think, this is on the minds of some of the people even in the chat, is, are there risks of distilling down, into kind of 6 types of overgeneralizing, sort of missing some of the nuance between and within these groups? I mean, of course, the answer is yes, but how have you kind of grappled with that in your research? And that's very important just for all kinds of qualitative research. So I'm excited to talk about this.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that was definitely true of the archetypes that we ended up deciding on, which was we kept thinking of people that we thought we should have, because we didn't have any, for instance, students, and we didn't have any retirees, both of which are definite types of people who take MOOCs. But we felt we had sort of captured the range of motivations that we thought was a large enough bucket that we could fit other motivations into, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And for the qualitative research itself, so we can't make any sort of causal sort of decisions based on qualitative research, obviously, because the sample size is very small. The purpose of this work is really to propose a theory or a hypothesis of how something works. And you don't know, there's no good answer on what's the right sample size or how much data to collect. But the rule of thumb is always you keep interviewing until you aren't hearing anything new, until you've sort of you've heard everything before. I feel reasonably sure based on my interviews and also based on collaborating with other DLLs and practitioners that I think I would propose. I feel reasonably confident that I could stop where I stopped. Like, certainly I'm sure I missed some things because, you know, people are extremely diverse and there's thousands and thousands of MOOC learners. But yeah,
And then one very
have to
specific
stop
question.
somewhere.
One very specific question that I'm also just really curious in from Dr. Nazneen Rustam. To what extent does this account for whether people have actually paid for the courses, right? Or if they are free to access, and, you know, how much did people talk about that?
People talked about that a lot. That was a very important thing to a lot of people. And I would say I would say it's not a firm rule. People would typically paid for a certificate if they had a reason to, like, to use that certificate for something. That was often the way they described it, like, oh, I don't need a certificate, so I'm not going to pay for it. And they did report a lot of feeling like annoyed about not being able to sometimes access all of the course for free, or sometimes they would pay for the course just so they could have access to all the PSETs or something. But it was definitely a point that came up a lot. And I would say sometimes people were happy to pay for the course. Also, they saw it as like a form of donation or helping support the creation of these kinds of courses. But they had a lot of very firm opinions about when and when they were not happy to pay, and also like when and when was not an appropriate time to earn a certificate.
Mm-hmm. Does that, Shira, does that factor into course design, or how would, you know, learning design?
Yeah, I mean, so I was just thinking that people who are willing to pay or tend to want to complete the course, right? They're going to be those learners who are enrolling from start to finish, I would think. Oh, Megan's shaking her head, maybe not.
I would say for the most part, yes, but not always.
No, not always. And so again, like, I think that we need to think about how to design courses for all of these learners. I mean, it's hard. It's not it's not an easy thing to do. But I think taking some of these tips and tricks that are on the backside of the guide can be helpful in at least starting that conversation and thinking about how to design for multiple motivations. We have to start somewhere. And again, we always do try to iterate, right? So if we learn something new while we're in the course and we say, oh, wait, we haven't considered this particular learner motivation, let's think about how we might redesign it for the next run.
Mm-hmm. So Shira, let me start with that, or, you know, sort of turn that around a little bit as well. And the other thing that, you know, needs attention from the very beginning in learner design is accessibility, right? In the broadest sense. So what, you know, what is that like for you as a learning designer in a broad sense, but also is there anything in this sort of MOOC design guide that helps us think about sort of accessibility issues?
So, I mean, accessibility in the larger sense, I mean, we sort of talked about that in terms of global use, making sure it's accessible to everybody, making sure we use examples that are open and understandable by everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are more specific things that we do in our courses to make it accessible for learners who use screen readers, for instance. So we always have transcripts available. We have videos that are downloadable. And these are very specific things, but we use alt text for images, and those are all required in all of our courses, so that those are accessible to learners with hearing or visual issues.
And Megan, to what extent did that come up in your conversations and your research, or either with learners, or when you were sort of piloting this research, with learning designers?
Yeah, certainly. It's and I'd say this is something we have been very aware of even before this research. I can't take credit for this theme. It's been a really important topic for open learning for as long as I've been here. But definitely it came up with learners of talking to me about different disabilities they had, or sort of like conditions that they were experiencing, that they felt like some aspects of course design were more amenable to their learning than others. So yeah, I think it's just as Shira was saying, like it's a practice of iteration and sort of learning from others and from what you've done before.
So I will maybe just, we're up against time, but I'll give sort of one last question for both of you, which is, coming from our MIT colleague, Professor Shigeru Miyagawa. In all this research, what's in this for faculty members who haven't made a MOOC, right, or are doubtful about digital learning in the broadest sense? Are there what might they be overlooking that this research might bring to them? So I'll maybe turn that to Megan, and then I'll have a final for Shira.
That's such a good question. I would say I think a lot of this work is motivated by this desire to sort of say what MOOCs are, because I feel like we often are talking about what they aren't. And I think like that is a question that I think is difficult to portray to faculty, because we can say, okay, we know that they're not exactly like your on-campus teaching. They aren't this, but what are they? So it's sort of, I think we've been doing this for a number of years now, and we're starting to have we're like starting to build out like what our understanding of what is this and what is the potential of this, and what is it not. But I think it's a really great opportunity to reach and have a dialogue with a massively diverse audience of people around the world who are interested in this topic. And I think that a lot of faculty don't really understand that about the MOOC opportunity. Like they think about it in sort of a vague sense of like, okay, I'm going to take my course and make it available to everyone. But I think it's not so much thinking as often about like, I'm going to be able to engage in this sort of international global dialogue about my work, my teaching, my ideas, like with thousands of people who are interested in this. And then to also be able to create this kind of learning space where people can come and participate, and where also, faculty and course designers can learn things about the topic as well. It's a knowledge generating space. It's not just necessarily a knowledge repository. So I would say that's what I hope to be able to communicate, and is sort of what are MOOCs?
That's fantastic. And I'm sorry, Shira, I'm not going to let you have the last word, because Megan did it so well. And also we are sort of up against the hour here. As you can see, this is research in progress. Open Learning loves to share our research in progress, and I hope you'll join us for future OL talks. I have a feeling we'll be hearing from Megan Perdue again as this research evolves. And again, the recording of this will be posted on the Open Learning YouTube channel as soon as it's captioned and ready. And we encourage you to join us and watch it again or at a future event. So thank you very much to everybody, especially to Megan and Shira, and have a great afternoon, evening, or morning, wherever you're joining us from. Thanks very much.
Chris.